Have you ever, really stopped to think about what the very first complex civilization actually looked like? Because, most people, and I definitely used to be in this camp, they immediately picture, the pyramids in Egypt, right?
Sure, Egypt's the classic example. Or maybe ancient Greece?
Rome, exactly.
Yeah.
Greece, Rome, the big names. But what if I told you that way, way before any of that, there was this truly groundbreaking civilization?
Okay.
And they were already building these massive, bustling cities, crafting really complex legal systems. And get this, they literally invented writing.
Wow. Okay, inventing writing itself, that's huge.
Right. Thousands of years earlier than, the usual starting points in history class.
It really pushes the timeline back.
It does. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a shortcut, kind of, to getting you really well informed about a civilization that, honestly, laid the blueprints for almost everything that followed.
And where are we headed?
We're going way back, like the absolute dawn of civilization, to ancient Sumer.
Sumer. Right there in the heart of Mesopotamia.
Exactly. And these guys, the Sumerians, they weren't just, around. They were thriving as early as 4000 BCE.
Which is astonishingly early.
It really is. It genuinely surprises people who just assume Egypt came first or, some other culture. Okay, let's really unpack this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because what they pulled off back then is just, it's extraordinary.
And that's exactly our mission for this deep dive today. We want to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, really, from the sources we've looked at.
Guide us through it.
We'll guide you through their whole journey. We'll look at the unique geography, how that totally shaped their destiny, the structure of their society, which was surprisingly sophisticated.
Okay.
Their innovations, truly groundbreaking stuff that honestly still echoes today. Their spiritual life, which was central. Their legal systems.
They had actual laws.
Oh, yeah. Pioneering legal frameworks. And maybe most importantly, their kind of unseen but profound influence on, everything that came after. Our goal here is really to show you just how fundamental their groundwork was, how their ideas still impact us thousands of years later, often in ways you'd never even guess.
Okay, so to really get our bearings in this ancient world, let's start right at the beginning. Geography.
Good place to start.
When we say cradle of civilization, what specific patch of land are we talking about? Where exactly was Sumer?
Right. It's a great question because geography is, it's often destiny for early civilizations. Sumer was located in southern Mesopotamia.
Mesopotamia, modern day.
Modern-day Iraq, basically. And specifically, it was this fertile plain nestled right between two incredibly important rivers, the Tigris River to the east and the Euphrates River to the west.
Tigris and Euphrates. Okay. Heard of those.
Yeah, they're crucial. And this whole area, because it was so naturally rich, thanks to those rivers, it gets called the Fertile Crescent.
The Fertile Crescent.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And it got that name fertile because,
Yeah.
Rich soil.
Yeah.
Right? Seems obvious.
It does seem obvious, and it's spot on. It's quite literally about the soil. See, those two big rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, they flooded regularly, often every year.
Floods usually sound like a bad thing.
Well, today we think of them as disasters, sure. But for the ancient Sumerians, these yearly floods were an unbelievable gift.
How so?
Because each time they flooded, they dumped this incredibly rich, nutrient-packed silt all over the surrounding plains. It was like nature's fertilizer, delivered free of charge every year.
Okay. So the floods renewed the land constantly.
Exactly. Made the soil absolutely perfect, almost magical for growing crops intensively.
So this amazing fertile land, that must have been a total game changer for early humans, right? Moving beyond just hunting and gathering.
Oh, completely revolutionary. Think about it. Before this, people were mostly nomadic. Always moving, searching for food, following herds, hunter-gatherers.
Right, living day to day.
Exactly. But this consistently fertile land, it didn't just give them food, it gave them a choice, the option to settle down, to farm the same land year after year and actually produce more food than they needed right away, a surplus.
A surplus. That changes everything.
It's arguably the single biggest leap towards organized civilization, because once you settle, you start building permanent homes.
Right. Structures?
And if you build, you need to organize people to do the work. If you have extra food, you can support more people. Population grows.
And more people living together means...
You need rules. You need systems. How do we live together without chaos? How do we manage resources? It's like the silent trigger that just sparked everything else. Small groups became dense, organized societies.
Which then leads directly to the birth of actual cities, not just big villages, but real urban centers. You mentioned Uruk, Eridu earlier.
Precisely. And these weren't just like collections of huts. They were genuinely sophisticated places, thousands of people living together.
Wow, thousands. Back then.
Yeah. Needing water, food distribution, defense, ways to manage everything collectively. But here's where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay.
That fertile land was a gift, absolutely. But it came with a catch. A terrifying one.
Which was?
Those same rivers, the life-giving Tigris and Euphrates, they could also turn into these monstrous, unpredictable destroyers, like overnight.
Oh, right. The floods weren't always gentle gifts.
Not at all. They could wipe out everything. Crops, homes, lives, entire settlements. Imagine living with that constant fear. It wasn't just like an inconvenience. It was an existential threat.
Okay, so how do you deal with that? How do you use the rivers without being destroyed by them?
Exactly. So out of that constant, brutal challenge, necessity truly became the mother of invention for them. It forced them to come up with some brilliant solutions.
They had to innovate just to survive.
They absolutely did. Innovate or perish, basically.
Yeah.
So to manage these wild rivers and get the most out of their farmland, they developed these incredibly advanced irrigation systems.
Irrigation, like canals and stuff.
Way beyond just simple canals. We're talking complex networks. Dikes, reservoirs, channels, all designed to control the water, move it where it was needed for crops, protect settlements from those killer floods.
That sounds like a massive engineering project.
Monumental. And coordinating water like that over huge areas, it also forced them to develop early calendars.
Calendars? Why calendar?
To predict the floods and figure out the best times for planting. You needed precision.
Ah, okay. To plan around the river cycles.
Exactly. And maybe the biggest thing, the sheer scale of building and maintaining these irrigation systems.
Yeah.
It demanded unbelievable levels of cooperation. You couldn't do it alone. Thousands of people had to work together, organize labor, share resources, pool knowledge.
So it wasn't just smart individuals. It was about society organizing itself.
Absolutely. It was this amazing collective adaptation. They had to master their environment, essentially. What's fascinating here is how nature itself forced innovation. Essentially, civilization was born out of necessity. Challenges really pushed them forward, made them ingenious problem solvers on an epic scale.
Wow. So the geography itself, this mix of incredible bounty and terrifying threat, it basically forced them to organize and innovate like never before.
Pretty much set the stage.
Okay, so they've got these bustling cities, sophisticated systems. How was Sumerian society actually structured? Once you have thousands of people together, who's in charge? Who's running the show? What did that look like back then?
Yeah, that's the logical next question, right? How did it all work? Well, Sumer wasn't a single unified kingdom. Not at first, anyway.
No single king of Sumer.
Not initially. Instead, it operated on this really unique model of independent city-states.
City-states, okay.
So imagine each major city, Uruk, the ones we mentioned, not just as a town, but as its own separate sovereign nation.
Like its own little country.
Exactly like that. Each had its own ruler, its own specific laws, often its own main god or goddess they were devoted to. They acted independently, sometimes they worked together, sometimes they fought, but they kept their own identities.
That sounds a bit like the ancient Greek city-states, maybe? But much earlier.
That's a really good comparison, actually. Very similar idea, but yes, definitely earlier and maybe even more foundational in how they developed.
Okay. So who ruled these city-states?
Well, central to each one was this figure of just immense power. They were known either as the Ensi or sometimes the Lugal.
Ensi or Lugal.
Okay, and these weren't just kings in our modern sense, purely political leaders. And they weren't just priests either.
What were they then?
They were what we call priest kings.
Priest kings, a combination.
Exactly. An extraordinary combination. They held both religious and political authority. They were seen as the vital link, the intermediary between the people and the gods.
So they were responsible for, well, everything. Keeping the gods happy and running the city.
Absolutely everything. Spiritual well-being, making sure the city's god was pleased, but also economic prosperity, leading the army, maintaining order. This dual role made them central to literally every single aspect of life.
Wow, that's a lot of power and responsibility rolled into one person. King and high priest combined.
Immense power, yeah. Which makes perfect sense then when you realize that the city itself physically revolved around the temple. Not just figuratively, like actually centered on it.
The temple was the center of town.
Precisely. You've really hit on a key part of Sumerian city planning. They weren't random layouts. They were deliberately centered around these enormous temples dedicated to the city's specific patron god or goddess.
And these temples weren't just for praying.
Oh, far more than that. That's a common misconception. Yes, worship happened there, but they were also critical political hubs. Big decisions were made there.
Political decisions in the temple.
Yep. And they were huge economic engines, too. They often owned massive amounts of farmland, managed trade routes, stored grain surpluses, ran workshops for artisans.
Wow. So like the government offices and the bank and the church all rolled into one building.
That's a great way to put it. And the administrative center, too, keeping records, managing the bureaucracy. The temple was truly the beating heart of the Sumerian city, the ultimate nexus of power, money, and faith.
Okay, with that kind of structure, that clear center of power,
Yeah.
it sounds like there must have been pretty clear social classes, too. Was it very hierarchical?
Extremely. Highly structured society, a very clear pecking order, you could say. It reflected how complex the city-state had become.
So who was at the top?
Right at the top, you had the ruling elite, the priest-king, naturally high-ranking priests, their families, the people embodying that mix of religious and political power we talked about.
Okay, the leaders. Who was next?
Directly below them, you had a kind of middle tier of skilled professionals, really vital people, scribes, for instance.
Writers.
Exactly. Highly educated, essential for records. Then you had military leaders, soldiers, and importantly, merchants.
Merchants. Trade must have been important.
Crucial. Sumer didn't have things like wood, stone, or metals locally, so merchants traveled long, often dangerous routes to bring those in, trading surplus grain and crafts. Also in this tier were the artisans, potters, metalworkers, weavers, sculptors, making everything from daily tools to beautiful art for the temples.
So the skilled workers and professionals.
Right. Their lives were specialized, probably relatively comfortable compared to others.
And below them.
Below them was the vast majority of the population, the farmers.
Ah, the ones working that fertile land.
Exactly, the backbone of the whole civilization. Tilling fields, planting barley and wheat, managing those complex irrigation canals. Their lives were tough, no doubt, tied to the seasons, hard labor. But they fed everyone.
Makes sense. And was there a bottom tier?
Yes. Sadly, at the very bottom, forming the kind of grim foundation, were slaves.
Slavery existed back then, too.
It did. People could become slaves through debt, being captured in war, or just being born into it. Their lives were harsh. Manual labor fields, mines, households. They had few rights, considered property.
So a very layered society, top to bottom.
Very much so. This structure dictated your role, your access to resources, your influence, everything about your life, which raises an important question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How did this unique blend of spiritual and temporal authority, this rigid social structure, how did it not just shape their daily lives, but also somehow lead to these incredible advancements we're about to talk about?
Right. That's the perfect place to go next.
Yeah.
Because I'm so excited to talk about their inventions.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing stuff.
I mean, when you talk about things that literally changed human history, the Sumerians hit some absolute home runs. And the biggest one, the one that always gets me, is they invented writing right, didn't they?
They absolutely did. And yeah, it is mind-blowing, a true testament to their, sheer brain power. The Sumerians are widely credited with inventing writing around 3200 BCE.
3200 BCE.
Yeah.
That's over 5,000 years ago.
It is a monumental achievement. Think about it, a cognitive leap for humanity. It completely changed how knowledge, laws, stories, how everything could be saved and passed on. And this early writing, it's called cuneiform.
Cuneiform. I love that word. Can you describe it? Like, what did it actually look like? What were they writing on?
Yeah, okay, so imagine starting with simple pictures, pictograms, drawn on wet clay tablets to represent an object or an idea, like a picture of a head for head or wavy lines for water.
Okay, straightforward enough.
That's how it started. But over time, drawing detailed pictures was slow. So for efficiency, these pictures got simpler, more stylized, more abstract.
Streamlined it.
Exactly. Scribes started using a reed stylus, basically a stick with a shaped tip, to press marks into the soft clay instead of drawing lines.
Pressing, not drawing.
Right. Pressing these distinctive wedge-shaped marks. It was faster. And it's those wedge shapes that give it the name cuneiform. Cuneus is Latin for wedge.
Ah, wedge-shaped writing. Okay.
And once they wrote on the clay, they'd either bake the tablets in kilns or just let them sun-dry. made them incredibly durable.
Which is why we still have them.
Exactly. Hundreds of thousands have been found. They give us this amazing direct window into their world, their thoughts, their daily grind.
That's incredible. So what did they write about? Was it just like keeping track of sheep, or did they write stories, more creative stuff?
Oh, they wrote about everything. It started practically, for sure. Trade records were huge.
Yeah.
Documenting deals, who owned what, inventories of goods, tax receipts, the boring but essential stuff for a complex economy.
Gotta track the barley.
Gotta track the barley. And legal documents too, contracts, court decisions, land ownership. But as cuneiform got more sophisticated, they used it for so much more.
Like what?
Hymns to their gods, proverbs, historical accounts bragging about kings and battles, even early science and medicine observations, remedies.
Wow. And stories. Did they write literature?
They absolutely did. And profound stuff, too. The prime example, the one that just stands out as this towering achievement, is the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Gilgamesh, I've heard of that. That came from Sumer.
Directly from Sumerian mythology. It's one of the oldest known stories, period. A huge epic poem.
What's it about?
It's got everything. Heroism, adventure, a search for immortality, deep friendship, devastating loss. It really grapples with what it means to be human facing our own mortality.
Themes we still deal with today.
Totally universal themes. It's amazing that some of the earliest recorded thoughts on being human come from these Sumerian clay tablets. Truly incredible.
Okay, so writing in epic literature, that alone feels like, wow, mission accomplished for one civilization. What else did they invent? Were there other big ones?
Oh, yeah. Their genius didn't stop there. It was truly multifaceted. Like, they shone brightly across so many fields. So take mathematics.
Math, okay.
They developed this unique base 60 number system.
Base 60, not base 10 like us.
Nope. Base 60, which might sound weird or, totally abstract, but its legacy is literally woven into our daily lives.
How so? What does base 60 have to do with me?
Well, it's the reason we have 60 seconds in a minute.
No way.
60 minutes in an hour.
Seriously?
And 360 degrees in a circle?
That's from the Sumerians.
Directly. It's not just some historical fun fact. It's a direct line from ancient Sumerian math nerds to your watch, your phone's clock, your GPS, how you navigate, how you organize your whole day.
Mind blown. Every time I check the time, I'm using a Sumerian system.
Pretty much. Yeah. Over 5,000 years later. It's incredible when you wrap your head around it.
Absolutely.
Okay, what else?
Well, their curiosity went beyond Earth, too, up to the heavens. They were really keen astronomers, watching the stars.
Yep. Developed surprisingly accurate early calendars, mostly based on the moon's cycles, made detailed star charts. This was vital for tracking seasons, for farming, obviously, but also for timing their religious festivals and rituals.
Practical astronomy.
Very practical. And then there's the wheel.
The wheel. Did they invent the wheel?
Well, its exact origin is always a bit debated by archaeologists, but the earliest known use of the wheel for transport definitely shows up in somewhere around 3500 BCE.
Okay, so they were at least among the very first, using it for carts and stuff.
Exactly. But its impact was way bigger than just carts. It revolutionized pottery, making the potter's wheel allowed for faster, standardized pots. It got used in irrigation tech, too. And of course, it totally changed warfare and transport later with the chariot.
Wow. The wheel is fundamental.
Absolutely. And just circling back quickly to those irrigation systems.
Right, the ones necessity forced them to build.
They kept refining them, expanding them. These weren't just ditches. They were massive engineering projects, transforming deserts into fertile land. Again, needing constant work, constant organization.
So summing it up, they were like scientists, engineers, storytellers, mathematicians.
All rolled into one. And this was over 5,000 years ago. Their impact on just the basic foundations of knowledge, technology, daily life, it's staggering and so often underestimated.
It really is. Achieving so much so incredibly early, it's genuinely hard to process. Now, you mentioned earlier that those priest kings held both religious and political power.
Right.
And the cities were built around the temples. So religion must have been just woven into the absolute fabric of Sumerian life, maybe even more than in later civilizations.
It absolutely was, core to their entire existence. You really can't separate Sumerian life from Sumerian religion. Their whole view of the world was soaked in religious belief.
So they believed in gods. like multiple gods.
Yes, they practiced polytheism, worshipped a huge pantheon, loads of gods and goddesses. Each one had their own job, basically controlling different parts of nature or aspects of human life.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is that each city-state had its own main, patron deity, a divine protector for that specific city.
Oh, like Uruk had its own special god.
Exactly. Uruk was dedicated to the powerful goddess Inanna. She was associated with love, fertility, but also war. Very complex figure. Nippur, another major city, revered the god Enlil, lord of wind, air, earth, storms, a super important god in their whole system.
So each city had its own divine sponsor, almost.
That's a good way to think about it. It really cemented the independence and unique character of each city-state. Others included gods like Nana, the moon god, Utu, the sun god associated with justice, and Enki, god of water, wisdom, and creation, a whole cosmic committee.
And the temples they built for these gods,
Yeah.
they were pretty spectacular, right? The Ziggurats.
Ziggurats, yes, absolutely iconic structures. They really defined the skyline of Sumerian cities for centuries. Became a lasting symbol of Mesopotamian building.
What did they look like exactly?
Imagine these colossal stepped pyramids, like giant staircases going up to the sky, built painstakingly out of millions and millions of sun-dried mud bricks.
Mud bricks, not stone.
Mostly mud brick, yeah. Sometimes faced with baked bricks on the outside for protection. Building one was a massive community effort, and each ziggurat was dedicated to a specific god, and it was quite literally the physical and spiritual center of the city.
And the height, the steps,
Yeah.
was that just for looks?
No, it had deep symbolic meaning. They believed the gods actually lived, or at least visited, the shrine right at the very top. So the ziggurat was like a ladder, a stairway connecting the earth to the heavens.
A connection point.
Exactly, allowing prayers and offerings to go straight up to the gods.
So were they trying to physically climb up to meet their gods? Could anyone just wander up?
Oh, definitely not. Access was super restricted. That really emphasized how sacred the place was and the hierarchy involved.
Only certain people could go up?
Only the high priests and priestesses. They were the intermediaries, remember? Only they could enter that inner sanctum right at the top. It reinforced their power, the sacredness of the gods, created this sense of awe for everyone else down below.
Makes sense. And what do they believe these gods actually did?
Well, the Sumerian worldview was basically that they're gods who could be powerful but also kind of moody and unpredictable.
Capricious.
Yeah, exactly. They controlled everything. Absolutely everything. The floods that brought life, the droughts that brought famine, who won battles, personal luck, even getting sick. It was all decided by the gods.
Okay, so if the gods are in charge of everything, pleasing them becomes priority number one.
That is the absolute critical takeaway. It explains so much about their society. Because pleasing the gods wasn't just about feeling good spiritually.
It was about survival.
Literally survival.
Yeah.
The religion wasn't so much about personal salvation like some later faiths. It was deeply public, intensely political, and incredibly practical.
Practical religion, how so?
All those big public festivals, the elaborate animal sacrifices, the constant work building and maintaining those huge temples, it was all done to keep the gods happy, to ensure the land stayed fertile, the community stayed healthy, the city was safe and prosperous.
So good harvests and safety depended on religious rituals.
Directly. For the Sumerians, pleasing the gods meant surviving in a really challenging world. If we connect this to the bigger picture, their religious beliefs were interwoven with their very survival and governance, making them deeply influential. It wasn't a separate part of life. It was life, a constant practical force.
There really clicks, connecting daily survival so directly to spiritual belief. Okay, and speaking of keeping society running, keeping order, with these complex cities, the social structure, the need for cooperation, did they have laws? Like actual written laws?
They absolutely did. And again, not just informal rules or local customs. The Sumerians were true pioneers here too. They developed formal, advanced law codes.
Formal law codes, written down.
Yep. This is another area where they just laid fundamental groundwork, showing a remarkably sophisticated approach to justice, way ahead of their time.
Okay, because I think most people, when they hear first law code, their mind jumps straight to Hammurabi's code.
That's very common, yeah. And Hammurabi's code is super important, famous for that eye for an eye stuff. But, and this is crucial, one of the oldest known, really comprehensive law codes we have anywhere comes straight from Sumer. It's called the Code of Ur-Nammu.
The Code of Ur-Nammu. Okay.
And this isn't just a few rules, it's a detailed legal document. And the kicker, it actually predates Hammurabi's code by centuries.
Centuries, wow. How much earlier are we talking?
Maybe 300, even 400 years earlier. around 2100 to 2050 BCE. So again, it just underscores how early the Sumerians were developing these really abstract, sophisticated concepts, like formal legal principles.
Okay, so they beat Hammurabi to the punch by quite a bit. That definitely shifts the perspective. What kind of things did their code, or Nammu's code, cover? Was it like modern laws?
In a lot of ways, surprisingly similar. It shows that complex societies, even thousands of years apart, face common problems. The Code of Ur-Nammu dealt with theft, clear penalties for stealing stuff.
Okay.
It covered assault, bodily harm. It had laws about family life, marriage, divorce, inheritance, really important stuff for social structure.
Huh.
And naturally, given their reliance on farming, it addressed agricultural issues, disputes over fields, water rights for irrigation, things vital to their survival.
So core issues. Property, safety, family, resources. Sounds familiar.
Exactly. Shows how early humans were wrestling with these fundamental questions of conduct, rights, and justice.
And the punishments. We often think of ancient laws as being super harsh, eye for an eye, like you say with Hammurabi. Was Ur-Nammu's code like that? Really brutal.
That's another interesting point where Sumer, specifically this code, maybe challenges assumptions. While yes, some ancient codes were heavy on severe physical punishment, even death.
Yeah.
The Code of Ur-Nammu often leaned towards financial penalties for many crimes.
Fines instead of physical punishment.
Often, yes. For various offenses, even some involving injury, the penalty was frequently a fine paid in a set amount of silver rather than, say, chopping off a hand or worse.
Huh. So if you broke someone's arm, you might pay them silver instead of having your own arm broken.
That's the kind of principle you see in parts of the code. It suggests a more nuanced approach, maybe, where restitution, paying back the victim or society, played a big role, perhaps reflecting how commercial their society was becoming.
That does sound more advanced, in a way, than just pure retribution.
It certainly shows their legal thinking wasn't always as violently punitive as we might guess for such an early time. They were moving towards more formalized systems of compensation and trying to deter crime through fines.
So they weren't just amazing inventors of, like, writing and math and the wheel. They were also architects of complex legal systems, building the rules for society.
Precisely. That's what makes them so incredibly important and, like we said, often overlooked. They didn't just innovate technology, they built foundational systems for society.
Right.
Codified laws, procedures for settling disputes, the idea of restitution. These were revolutionary steps for organizing large groups of people. Moving beyond just tribal custom to written frameworks, they basically wrote the first instruction manual for running a large-scale society.
It's genuinely staggering when you list it all out. How much they gave us, how many fundamental pieces of our world started there. But, like all civilizations, their time eventually passed.
Okay.
So what happened to the Sumerians? Did they just disappear? Or did their work live on?
Yeah, that's the crucial question for their legacy, right? And thankfully, it's much more a story of lasting influence than just vanishing.
Okay.
The Sumerians, as like a distinct political or cultural group, they didn't just evaporate. Over time, their city-states were gradually absorbed into or conquered by later Mesopotamian powers that rose up.
Right.
Well, empires like the Akkadians, Sargon the Great, briefly united the region. Then the Babylonians, think Hammurabi, and later still the Assyrians, these big Mesopotamian empires that followed.
Okay, so they were succeeded by others.
Right. But the key thing is, these successors didn't just erase Sumerian culture, quite the opposite. They clearly recognized how valuable Sumerian achievements were. They borrowed heavily from Sumerian ideas, their institutions, their ways of doing things. They adapted it all for themselves.
Yeah. So the writing system, the religion, the laws, the way cities were run, all that knowledge got passed on and used by the next groups.
Absolutely. That continuity is one of their most powerful legacies. It proves they were truly foundational architects. Take Cuneiform, the writing system.
Yeah.
It had incredible staying power. It was used for over 3,000 years. Adapted by Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Elamites, Hittites. Loads of different cultures use it long after Sumer itself wasn't politically dominant. It became the sort of international script of the ancient Near East for a long time.
Like Latin in medieval Europe or something.
Exactly like that. Shows how useful and adaptable it was. And their myths... Gilgamesh, yes. But also other foundational stories. They continued to inspire later epics, later narratives in different cultures. You even see echoes, some scholars argue, in much later religious texts, like flood stories that pop up in various traditions. Many trace those back to Sumerian origins. And even their ways of governing, their administrative techniques, how they planned cities, These provided blueprints that later empires definitely learned from. It influenced how you organize and manage a large, complex society.
It really just hammers home that point. They literally laid the groundwork, the foundation for so much that we think of as just civilization.
Unequivocally, the foundation for organized government, for keeping written records, for the rule of law, for systematic thinking in math and astronomy, for large-scale engineering. These aren't small things.
No.
These are the absolute pillars that almost all later, more famous civilizations built upon. It's kind of the irony of history, isn't it?
How so?
Despite these massive, truly fundamental contributions that literally shaped the whole human story, most people today are still largely unaware of the Sumerians' incredible impact. They're kind of the unsung heroes, the quiet giants of history.
Yeah, the ones who did the foundational work that others built on and maybe got more famous for.
Exactly. Their innovations are things we still use every single day, often without realizing it.
It's true. You grow up learning Egypt, Greece, Rome. But Sumer was there first, inventing sometimes literally inventing the wheel.
Yeah, quite literally.
But without the Sumerians, without their genius, their responses to necessity, we might not have writing as we know it, or organized government, or even, you said, the 60-minute hour that structures our entire modern lives. It's profound when you realize that.
It truly is a profound thought, and this raises an important question, doesn't it, for you listening right now? What other fundamental aspects of our world, things we just take for granted every single day, might have surprisingly deep roots way back in these earliest human endeavors? It makes you wonder, how much of our present is really just an echo of these ancient, brilliant people just trying to survive and build something lasting?
What an absolutely incredible journey we've taken back to ancient Sumer. From seeing how they cleverly responded to the gifts and threats of the Fertile Crescent.
Right, the rivers.
To understanding their unique city-state structure, those powerful priest kings, then diving into their just mind-blowing inventions, cuneiform, base 60 math, the wheel.
The list goes on.
And their early law codes, prioritizing fines sometimes, and that deeply practical religion tied to survival. It's genuinely astounding to grasp the sheer depth of what they achieved, laying down the blueprints for civilization. So hopefully you listening now feel like you've got that shortcut. You're incredibly well informed about the true architects.
Indeed. And just as a final thought to take away from this deep dive, consider this. How many things we see as purely modern, things like detailed urban planning, how our cities are laid out, or the complex systems of public administration that manage our daily lives, or even the basic scientific approach, observing a problem, developing a solution, testing it. How much of that might have first taken root, not in some modern lab, but in the sheer necessity and ingenuity of the Sumerians thousands of years ago. They weren't just building cities. They were laying down the concepts, the ways of thinking, often just because they had to survive and thrive.
Wow.
It really encourages you, I think, to see ancient history not as this distant, dusty thing, but as something deeply, intimately connected to our present. A continuous story, really, stretching all the way back to these amazing pioneers.
Absolutely. Well, we hope this deep dive into Sumer has really sparked your curiosity, given you a new appreciation for where so much of our world truly began. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and we'll see you on the next deep dive into the past.